Hello. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this EGI organized session on data spaces, architecture, business models, and supporting initiatives, one of the first events of the EOSC Symposium. I'm very happy to see you all here. So what is this session about? As my colleague Mark from EGI says, data spaces are kind of a new kid on the infrastructure block. They are all around, and you've heard many things, but what the data space actually is, that's a question for discussion here. We are already very well known what they should be set up for, what is the purpose of the data spaces, but the actual architecture, the governments, and different setups are still being built. So that's why it's so important to discuss them here at the EOSC Symposium, to build this connection with the EOSC community. So what we're going to do, we will have a first general introduction from Mark about the data space landscape as it is right now. We will get introductions of several sectoral data spaces set by the European Commission right now. So there are several coordination and support projects funded by the European Commission, and we will have 3 of them introduced here because they are very much linked to the research community. And we should discuss what is the connection between these different sectoral data spaces and EOSC. How to bring the viewpoints of data spaces to EOSC, and how then the EOSC users, or how the data spaces can reach wider user community. We will also focus on how to connect the future data spaces users with the open practices and the open science practices and the EOSC. And we will, hopefully in the closing panel, we will also look at the possible complementarities between different initiatives that are building data spaces and EOSC, and what are the steps forward in the practical integration and cooperation. So, as said, we will have Mark Dietrich from EGI here, who will introduce the general landscape, but he will also specifically talk about the Green Deal data space. Then Milana Dobreva from Sofia University will introduce the European data space for cultural heritage. Juan Areas Marquez from Elixir NRI will speak about the genomic data architect infrastructure, a project that is very closely linked to health data space. And finally, Giuseppe La Rocca from EGI will speak about the data spaces, thematic data spaces that are being set up by the EGI ACE project that are directly leveraging the EOSC compute platform. So now I would like to give floor to Mark. But before that, I will shortly introduce Mark Dietrich is a senior advisor with EGI Foundation, guiding EGI's alignment with initiatives of the European Commission with the broader cloud computing industry in Europe and with global open science efforts. Mark is an experienced leader and senior executive skilled in a wide range of technologies with particular expertise in high-performance computing, spearheading Canada's National Advanced Research Computing Organization, Compute Canada, in a complete refresh of its technology base and full refinancing of its operation. Mark has advised e-infrastructure organizations on 4 continents, as well as global vendors of advanced computing technology on issues of strategic planning, service alignment, and operational impacts of technology trends. Mark has a BEE from Vanderbilt University in mathematics, computer science, and electrical engineering. Mark, floor is yours.
So thank you, Magdalena, and thank you everyone for joining us. I have a quick question before we jump into this. How many of you have heard about data spaces? How many of you have not heard about data spaces? How many of you think you understand data spaces? Excellent. So I'll try to put this idea into context, there's it's a fair question to say, is a data space a new thing, or is it the same thing with a different word, different name? Fair question. So first point is, why should we talk about data? And I think that this is not an earth-shattering piece of information for any of you. The growth of data has been exponential. There has been talk of likening data to the new oil as a new driver for the economy. I like to think of data as more like the new uranium, because if you put it all together, you actually get some interesting results, like a nuclear fission or some kind of unexpected outcomes. So it's a significant issue. It's a significant issue that the European Commission has identified as a potential driver for the economy in Europe, and so that's why they have focused on it. So what are some of the factors that are driving this? Questions of free flow of data. What are the limitations on that? How do we ensure the so-called single market that the European Union has been working so hard to achieve? They're working on the single market for products and services, but they also want to have a single market for data. So that means cross-domain data access. How do we allow people from different walks of life, different sectors, to access data from the other sector? How does that work? What are the issues that are related to that? How do we standardize these data sharing practices so that we're not, by virtue of going from sector 1 to sector 2, creating a problem because we don't understand the rules? How do we connect the data silos that exist? And we know they do exist, and they exist even in the world of open science. And we can talk about even that little piece of it. How do we bring those pieces together? How do we empower data innovation and business models? The argument is, in this slide from before, these names that are up there are largely data-driven businesses. They're huge, massive businesses. So where's the European version of that, and how do we make that happen in Europe? Data sovereignty. If we want the Googles and Microsoft, a homegrown version of those to exist, at the same time we want to make sure that it respects, I would call human values, but it's often called European values of data sovereignty, control over your own destiny, and so forth. What's the regulatory framework? What values do we build into the system? And is the technology ready? Now, this is fundamentally not a technology-driven activity, but at the same time, there are frequent comments in European Union documents that say we want to pool data, make a bigger pile of data so that we can then enable the world of AI, because AI depends on big pools, big piles of data. So how do we make those things work? So this is a picture from the Commission that illustrates, it's a cartoon of what the European Union's data strategy is. It has lots of moving parts. There are actions on the cloud side. This is the infrastructure side. There are also actions about data. I would mention the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, various investments through the Digital Europe program in specific creation of common European data spaces. There are lots of underlying infrastructure investments. For example, some of you are familiar with Gaia X. EGI is a member of Gaia X and very aware of some of the things they're trying to do. And then over on the far right, you see the data spaces themselves that have been recently funded, the coordination and support actions to create them, as well as the Data Spaces Support Center to provide some common capabilities. Here's another view of that same range of activities, and you see the little, well, they're pentagons, but I call them home bases because they're from baseball. Health, different sectoral areas. The part that's not there but has appeared on many Commission pictures has been a little home base or pentagon for the European Open Science Cloud, or research in general. So the idea is that open science is a sister to all of these other sectoral data spaces, and all of them are expected to work together, to talk together, to communicate, to share data across these different sectoral divides. Underneath it, you have the Data Spaces Support Center, which is a common capability intended to foster a common framework for all these data spaces, to talk to one another. And then underneath, you've got various technical infrastructure, the kind of stuff that we've been dealing with in this community for decades. Now, going through the rest of the talks today, I'm going to change my hat. I'm going to talk about the Green Deal. EGI is a partner in the coordination and support action to create a Green Deal data space, and we're going to talk specifically about what we're going to accomplish there. Okay, I'll be there soon. The next one is Data Spaces Support Center. We'll hear from them. We're also going to hear from health, and we're also going to hear from a couple of the specific research-based areas. So just talk about the speakers who are here. There's me. Magdalena has introduced some of the other folks. You see some pictures of the individuals there. So we'll move on. Nope. We need to switch to the other. This is the part that Magdalena was going to help me with. So well. Nope.
No.
Am I not there?
It's not here.
What happened to it?
There is not. His slides are not here.
Yeah, there was another slide, another deck of mine.
Let's try this way. Which ones?
It was mostly Green Deal.
Did you move
Put it
them?
to this folder, did I?
No, I did not move it. That's the part I
Okay.
maybe have missed.
So do you have the, this it's here.
So why don't we switch right now to Juan? I think
No,
Juan was
it's
going to be
this.
next. Would you mind picking up while I get the slides into the right spot? Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, one. Let's help you out. So you are here. This is yours, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like.
Okay. Oh no. Not, it should. Screen, full screen.
Okay, so morning everyone. Thank you, Magdalena, for the opportunity to join today and to present the European Genomic Data Space and the relationship with the European Data Space. The first thing I want to say is that this is really an effort that is driven by the member states. So this started with the member states signing the OnePlus NG declaration, and the ultimate aim is to realize the practice of genomic medicine across Europe. But we are still far from that, and we are making steps toward that. So this is like to show how things have been happening so far. In the top, we have the OnePlus NG initiative, where the member states experts sit in a number of working groups, working on technical aspects, but also on domain aspects. After that started, we got the B1NG project that was there to fund, to accelerate this process, and is generating what is called the OnePlus NG Trust Framework that will bring all the recommendations that are required to establish this infrastructure. And then we are starting now, in fact, this month, the European Genomic Data Infrastructure Project. That is actually the deployment of this infrastructure at the European level. And it's very close connected to the European Data Space, in particular with the European with the health data at the EU pilot that has also just started, where they are going to pilot the architecture for the European Data Space 2, that is basically looking at reusing clinical data for research. So this is where we are, and we have a use case in the middle, that is the OnePlus NG cancer use case that we are using to connect these two worlds, the clinical side with the research side. So going into the project, GDI, as I mentioned, is going to start in November. We have the kickoff this week in Brussels, starting on Thursday. It brings 54 institutions from 20 countries. The aim is to have the infrastructure fully operational, or technically operational, by 2024, with at least 6 countries that should be connected. and providing services. And then by 2026, we expect to extend that at least to 15 countries. The project is a 40 million euros project. It's 50% co-funded, so there is a huge investment also from the different member states to make this happen. It's not only Commission funding, it's a combination of Commission and national funding coming together. And this is an overview of the project structure, and on top of the coordination and support activities, the project is organized in 3 different pillars. The first pillar is looking at the long-term sustainability. The second one is where most of the resources are allocated, is looking at the deployment and the operation of the infrastructure. And the last one is focused on identifying the gaps and how we can solve those gaps. So going a bit into details, so the first pillar, as I mentioned, is to identify what are the components that need to be sustained after the end of the project, and what is the structure that we have to put in place to ensure that we can run this infrastructure after the end of GDI. Then it's also looking at what is the best legal instruments to organize and to manage this infrastructure. And then it's also looking at what is the cost, how much it will cost at the European level, how much it will cost at the national level, and how this will be funded. And in this particular pillar, we basically bring all member states that are involved to discuss exactly this, because we need a commitment from member states to identify what are the solutions that we are going to push forward, to adopt them at the national level, and to sustain that in the long run. So that's the pillar 1. The pillar 2 is where we are going to do all the work on the deployment of the infrastructure, and it's a busy slide, but if we look from to the right side of that slide and bottom, top to bottom, we can see that we are working. We are starting the work on the OnePlus NG transfer framework that is being generated in the Big One NG project, bringing all the recommendations and from the experts in the project and national experts that are also involved. And then using that recommendation, we already built a couple of proof of concepts, real proof of concepts that are supporting research, but also clinical use cases. And there is an example there that you can access later. And then what we are going to do in the project is bring these countries together, that are the 20 countries that are working in the project, together to develop, to co-develop and to co-maintain the different solutions that will be there for countries to deploy. So the aim, as I mentioned before, is that by 2024 we will have this initial set of 6 countries at least that will be providing data storage, but also computational capacity, and that will be also running the European level services that includes a number of them, like the data discovery, the data catalog, and others. So that's the aim of Pillar 2, and that's why most of the resources are focused here, because the main thing that we identified is that we need to ensure that we provide, by the end of the project, we have the technical capacity at the European level to operate this infrastructure, and that's why most of the resources are here. So, and then we go to the last pillar that is more looking into the use cases, as you can see there, and trying to understand what are the additional needs they have, finding the gaps where we are still not meeting their needs, and then looking at what is out there and what is the best solution that we can promote to become part of the infrastructure, and that is the work of Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is owning the infrastructure, so they will check any solution that is proposed, and then they will validate and prepare the open source reference implementation that will be made available for countries to be deployed at the national level. Sorry. The important thing is that this is not happening in isolation. So we are working in a space where the European space is also present, and there is still quite a lot to see in the coming months, because the European space legislative proposal is in the European Parliament, and we don't know what is going to come out of that, but they will have an impact for sure on how this infrastructure will be connected. But the intention is that the learning that we are, the things that we are learning in building the genomic data infrastructure will somehow land also on the other data spaces when they have to deal with genomic data. So this is the use case that we are using to connect these two worlds. So this is part of the Health Data EU project. That's the pilot project that started in October. And here we bring in one side the European Data Space data nodes that are bringing the data, plus BMRI. And then we also bring the experts from Elixir and from from different countries that are bringing the expertise on how to make this happen. And we aim to have a demonstrator that will show how these three functionalities at least can be done in this domain. I think I'm about to finish, so just to highlight the consortia that is working together to make this happen, what is quite extensive. I couldn't fit that in a single slide. And I think that's all I have to say today.
Thanks, Juan.
Thanks.
So I think what Juan has shown is kind of a very common picture where there's the data on the top, there's the infrastructure at the bottom. They don't live in separate worlds. They live together in the same world. So it's a challenge to conceptually change the view so that they're separated and we abstract it. So that's the challenge that in the research community we have when we need to move from our traditional environment of a research infrastructure to this new idea of a data space. So thank you.
Just wanted to say apologies for the previous thing, and we will not take any question and answers right now. We will take them after all the talks.
So please, thank you. So let me just quickly share two perspectives to complement what Juan has already presented on the health domain. In the Green Deal data space, which is a project that has just started up, again, a coordination support action last couple of months. The scope is huge. Basically, we're combining the European data strategy with all of the things that are involved and touched by the European Green Deal strategy, which themselves, there are some 17 or 25, I forget the number, specific European Commission strategies and policy documents about the Green Deal. They cover also pollution and clearly climate change, as well as biodiversity and a number of other factors. These are all interrelated. The topics are connected, as you might expect them to be. The purpose of the Green Deal data space is not to necessarily provide the processing power to support all of that data, to work with all that data, but it is to get that data in one place. It's to get that data in one logical place. It doesn't have to be physically in the same place, but the idea is to make it a common resource that all the stakeholders across the Green Deal can access and can use to make evidence-based decisions. So the partners in the project, I'm listing the same bingo cards of different people who are involved. EGI is part of this, obviously, but we're very pleased to have a number of partners who are deeply experienced in many of these topics. And for example, several are involved in the ECMWF, such as ECMWF in the Destination Earth activity, which is a tight connection that we have and very much relevant to what the Green Deal data space will be doing. The other interesting thing is, aside from the fact that we have to solve the Green Deal, we have to do it in 18 months with almost no money. So nothing hard about that. Our pillars in our project are coming up with a reference architecture that makes sense for the Green Deal, that makes sense for the partners who have the data that is of interest to the Green Deal, developing appropriate governance and business models. That's a big challenge. It's not always about the technical infrastructure and interoperability. It's about the organizational and policy interoperability that we are spending time on. That's sometimes harder than the technology. And as a last point, one of the things that we're trying to do is to find the high-value data sets that are out there across the European Union, held by member states typically, that have that gold, those nuggets of insights that are squirreled away in some place that might have the right answers to certain specific questions. So a couple of use cases: the World Meteorological Organization's Global Cryosphere Watch, cryosphere data in support of Earth system monitoring. So how do we get this information together? How do you make decisions about whether you should be exploiting petrochemical resources that are under the permafrost? Are there, what are the issues associated with that? What kind of recommendations and policies should be put together to support that? Another use case, the effects of chemical exposure in human health, the so-called exposome. The issue is, how do we connect information about pollutant density in different places to corresponding data about health impacts in different places? Is there a correlation? Can we learn from that? Can we predict from that? So we have a call for many use cases, not just those two. Our whole methodology is built around the use of use cases because we cannot solve everything. We cannot boil the ocean, literally or figuratively. So we're focusing on some specific high priority, high impact use cases. We're going to explore what is needed to solve those use cases, identify the players, identify the blockers that are preventing this from working, et cetera. One of the definitions of a use case that's good is something that needs data, an application, a use case, a situation that requires data from multiple silos. The data is held by different people. Maybe some of that data is held by a for-profit corporation who says, I want to sell it. I don't want to give it to you. I want to sell it. When are you going to pay for my data? And over here you've got some open science research people who've said, I've got all this stuff, but I have no money to process it. I have no money to prepare it so that you can take advantage of it. So these are all the kinds of challenges in actually bringing this data together, even at the most simple level. So here's some information about our project. The slides will be available. You don't need to copy everything. And very quickly, I'd like to speak about on behalf of the Data Spaces Support Center. So this has been set up. It's a very large project. EGI is an affiliate partner, and this is that underlying support capability that's going to work underneath all those coordination and support actions. 3 main activities: create a network of stakeholders, identify the common requirements, and create a platform for knowledge exchange. So these are hard when you've got 11 projects, bigger communities, et cetera. Lots of people involved, either the direct partners, we're one of the affiliated partners as part of their strategic stakeholder group, and I can't, glasses necessary. You can see all the input data spaces on the left. You see all the stakeholders, not only in the direct activities, but also in the kind of receiving end of hoping to benefit from this, from the different data spaces, and then the 3 activities with across the Data Space Support Center. So on a community side, there's the Strategic Stakeholder Forum. They're building a community of practice, which would be very open to a broad spectrum of partners. Collaboration with other initiatives, such as Horizon Europe funded projects, need to be connected into this because they're doing an important work, as well as with policymakers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of this. And this one? Over to you.
So next one is Milana Dobreva, Associate Professor from Faculty of Mathematics and Informatics and Gate Institute Big Data for Smart Society in Sofia University in Bulgaria. The main interest of Milana is within this EOSC symposium is the connection between new ecosystems such as the data spaces and open science infrastructures. Please.
Good afternoon to everyone. So we are going to make a jump to yet another area, which is the cultural heritage data. I don't know, I also would be happy to make a poll of hands and see how many of you are coming from this domain. Just very few people. So we already saw Gate Institute on one of the slides of Mark, which is one of the institutions affiliated with this Data Space Support Center. In Bulgaria, this is the institution which will develop the data space domain, but I also come with the head of one of the members of the management board of the Europeana Network Association, and Europeana is the institution which is coordinating the effort of developing the data space for cultural heritage. So I will give a very quick overview of what's happening in this domain, mentioning 2 events which happened just in the last 10 days. This area is really buzzing and lots of discussions are happening. And I should say, if you ask us from this domain whether we know what is a data space, the answer would be no, unfortunately, because I think our difficulty is that, not just ours, but in general, data is a word everyone understands in some way. Space is another word which seems to be very easy to understand. But when you combine these together, intuitively it seems that we understand what it is, but actually it's very fuzzy. So that's, for those of you who are familiar with the data space domain, we have a mixed audience, but I wanted to use this very popular slide. That's a sort of an overview of what data spaces are. This comes from the International Data Space Association, one of the major players in the domain. And basically, data space is here somewhere in the middle, and we have on one side data owners, so institutions which own data with different rights to use this data. We have data providers, institutions which facilitate to get this data into the data space. The important bit is on the other side, we have the data users. And in different domains, we already heard about use cases from 2 different areas. The issues, what people want to do with data, of course, are very different. And what data they need to arrive to something which is adding value to what they are already doing in this domain. So we have this magic bit in the middle, which somehow should help to mix and recreate something new, taking as sources data which are available in various institutions. I wanted to explain this for the people who are new to this topic. That's also what the Data Space Association says. So this is domain-specific or cross-domain ecosystem. We have trusted partners, they share data in a sovereign way to benefit from the added value potential in many different use cases. It says that there are 4 maturity categories: leading, committed case, pilot, and live. When we look at the different domains, actually we will discover that the data spaces they are working on are on different levels. In the cultural heritage domain, we have a paradox, because the International Data Space Association, which has a radar where it maps existing data spaces, hasn't discovered any yet, so it's not even a lead-in. But on the other hand, within the big investment the European Commission is doing in this domain, cultural heritage apparently is considered to be mature. We have accumulated data, and that's the interesting thing. What was happening for decades in this domain was aggregating data. And data spaces are much more about federating data. So we have Europeana, which accumulated details on 58 million different objects. It has a big aggregation experience. It also has a network of almost 4,000 professionals interested in this domain. So different bits and pieces are there. And I'm using a couple of slides from an event we had 10 days ago, the annual meeting of our network. And this is a slide which says, okay, we will have all these different data spaces, and we will be looking for connections between cultural heritage and other domains. Green Deal comes just next to us, but also tourism, education, media, and open science is also relatively close if you look at this diagram. Another diagram with lots of logos of institutions. This is who is going to develop the data space in this domain. In the center, we have Europeana with its network association and the aggregators forum, and plenty of institutions which are playing a role in the development of the data space. And a bit of an idea, I mentioned that Europeana has a huge aggregation experience. This is a network of national and subject-specific aggregators across Europe. Engate, on the other hand, so this is a specific institution already engaged with this domain. We start working on the urban data space. I'm not going to talk about this, but we have a committed case. And just a few days ago, we had the launch of this data space. And for us, our future work will be including research related to what will empower the data space in the cultural heritage domain, and also making a connection between the cultural heritage and the urban data space, because they naturally can be really nicely linked. So I will conclude with few key data space questions. We have the question of what technology we are using, whether this is reusable in different domains and how exactly, the legal aspects, what are the issues around using data and derivatives of mixing data from different sources. The big question of use cases, we saw some which are emerging. In the cultural heritage domain, we are still discussing what use cases would really illustrate in a nice way the potential of data spaces. I also add here something which was not mentioned, capacity building. Since this area addresses plenty of institutions, we have to see if they are ready. So if you're a data owner, do you know how you will connect to the data space? If you are an institution with plenty of, let's say, academics who do research, want to do something in open science, how do you sort of stir them to use the new capabilities in a new ecosystem? The convergence with other data spaces, which I'm sure will be discussed also later, and the big question of connecting to other infrastructures and networks. We don't want to reinvent wheels, but at the moment, I think it's really important to map what are the efforts happening in these type of projects and how they can talk to big networks like EOSC and do something together, especially in the use of data. So in the next year, we start a new project, which is an ERA chair in data spaces for cultural heritage. We will look at a research agenda. I'm very happy to discuss this in more details with those who are interested, but it's the minority. And few thanks to Europeana, to the Gaia Institute, to the Future Dispatches project. Stay in touch. Okay.
Thank you. And now we welcome Giuseppe La Rocca from EGI, who will speak about the thematic data spaces that are being developed in the EGI ACE. Giuseppe works as community support team lead at the EGI Foundation, and one of his main activities is to establish strategies for the retention, development, and growth of the network of research projects and initiatives collaborating with EGI, of the community of users of EGI services, and for managing the EGI engagement, support, and the training annual plan. Here you are.
Thank you, Maddalena. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so in this talk, I will briefly introduce the EGI ACE data space, and of course, I will start with a short introduction about the project. For those of you who are not aware about EGI ACE, this is a EGI flagship project. It's a 30-month project that we started officially in January 2021. It's a flagship project for several reasons. First, because it involves all the partners of our federation. There are 33 partners plus additional third parties. And the second main reason is because all the services of the EGI stack are offered for supporting, of course, researchers. We provide solutions also for business entities. And last but not least, we also offer solution for operating our federation. So maintain the federation up and running, provide the glue for making all the different providers connected each other. So the scope of this project is on service delivery, which means that we have a very little effort dedicated to the developing activities. So all the budget from the Commission is dedicated for the operation and production and scalable services for EOSC. And this is why the data space comes in. Because, yeah, this is one of the solutions that we are supporting as a part of this project. Okay, so how we support in practice this data space? So we start, of course, from the infrastructure layer, because EGI has a long-running experience in federating capacity, computing and storage capacity. So what we did is to extend this capacity with additional resources from cloud, of course, but also recently with the HPC. So this is the infrastructure layer. On top of this, we are operating these platform services, which basically provide a solution for helping a community interested to do data analytics on big data using, I don't know, a web interface or like Jupyter Notebooks. I hope you are familiar with this solution. We provide the solution to deploy virtual cluster on top of infrastructure as a service. You can configure this with the cluster with your software. Solution to train model with the artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also orchestrator to run complex jobs on our infrastructure, federated infrastructure. So the PaaS orchestrator also provides the glue to federate the compute, the data, and the identity, which are the main area of interest for AGI. So we provide the solution to federate all the capacity, computing storage capacity, and also to access to this federation using your national accounts. So thanks to this architecture, the different application layers here represented by thematics and the data space are now able to deploy, host their data, and serve their community. You see here the community that we are targeting as a part of the GIAs. The focus is on the Green Deal, health and medicine, and also fundamental science sector, but we are also opening for new community. This is why in EGIAs we open a call for selecting new use case, because we want to increase the user base and identify additional community interested to support and interact with us. So this is the overall architecture. Very quickly, this is the status of the integration of this data space in our infrastructure. We distinguish between data space and thematic services. The data space, I don't know if we consider sort of a definition, is this environment which collect together the data set, the resources, and the domain-specific application and tools from the application, from the community. So we are supporting, we have 5 new data space already integrated in EOSC, and this data space has been supported in the framework of EGIAs, and additional ones is under development. And so this is a good achievement for EGI. So this means that the solution, the infrastructure offered by EGI can really contribute to deploy scalable data space in our federation. The methodology that we use for supporting data space is the following. So we not only provide the capacity and the solution of the platform, but we provide also the technical expertise, because most of the time you need the expert to integrate your application with the resources and the solution offered by EGI. This is what is different between Amazon. If you go in Amazon, you can ask for capacity, you pay for the capacity, but you don't receive the technical support. This is what is different with us. So we provide also technical support. And of course, also to promote the uptakes of this solution, we also organize and support the training activities, because this is another important activities. So we understand that the training is also important to reach other user, and this is why we try to support them. The 5 different thematic services are diverse, completely diverse. Of course, all of them are responsible to produce the data, to curate the data, and make this data available. So some of them are relying on our infrastructure. There's also offered by GIAs just for hosting this data, which is in the end available to the end user. While some other are just pre-caching some of this data, the most important one, the most updated one for end user. 4 out of 5 are from the environmental domains, so CDDANet, GBIF, EMSO-ERIC, and also Astron are from environmental domains, and one is from INES from climate change. And even if this is, the fairness is not an official objective for EGIAs, we decided to do this exercise. So we invited the data space provider to respond to the guidelines provided by the RDA working group. So what you see here is the snapshot of this analysis after the first year of the project. So after 12 months, we collected this input, and now we are asking the provider to redo this exercise because we are going to prepare a final deliverable which will be submitted by the end of this year. And yeah, this is the last slide about the training and the support activities. So we provide this technical support. We organize it together with the community, focused and specialized training events. 8 events were organized already, and also additional webinars were organized as a part of the Gaia X project. And another one is coming. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience.
Can you juggle those?
Nobody? Everything is okay, please. Okay.
Thank you. Baptiste Cecconi from the Paris Observatory. So I was interested in the last talk with this use case with Astron, with the LOFAR data. I was wondering how you discussed with the team to select the data, because this is a small amount of the LOFAR data that is there, because it's the archive is several petabytes. Here it's 9 terabytes. What was the scope of the use case here?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you are right. This is well, the data space. This data space was onboarded in EOSC last year. So this is the reasons why the amount of data that you see is still not so big, but things are improving in a positive way. Let's say so. We are pretty sure that this amount of data that will be offered will increase in the short term.
Okay. Yes, I'm Natalia Manola from OpenAir. I have a question on the technical level. Okay, where do you see overlaps, synergies, or differences between what EOSC Future is doing for EOSC Core, the IDS architecture footprint, and the emerging simple reference architecture? Or
so I can. Oh, geez. So I can speak loudly into this microphone. There are lots of functional overlaps. There are lots of boxes in the simple documentation that match up to what EOSC Core is building. The ideas that Deloitte has about how that should be built and what may be actually proposed as part of a procurement, it's hard to say. I do think there are, if you think more broadly to what are the possible technical solutions that already exist in the data space world, so IDSA, Gaia X, FileWare, they all have some very different technologies. They themselves are working together to try to harmonize this. It's unclear how this will align with Simple. It's certainly unclear how Simple or any of the existing technology designs that are being developed by these existing organizations align with EOSC Core. So those are all open questions. It's kind of a big task to think about how the pieces might fit together. As Milana showed in one of her slides, that underlying motherboard picture, which is the European, I think it was design technical, I don't know, framework. That doesn't exist. It's kind of a pipe dream on the part of the Commission. I think they also think that Simple is going to fill this bill, but it's still more PowerPoint than real code.
Yes, Jos van Weesel from KIT in Germany. I was wondering, I mean, to me, it's a kind of a proliferation of data spaces, right? All these communities and disciplines are now investing in this, and we just heard that there is a subset of data space compared to what is already done in the astrophysical world. I was wondering, how do you see this progressing in the future, how can you bring, I mean, the technical aspects are already discussed, but how can you aggregate later the governance again of all these different, I guess that's a question to Mark mostly, but how can you bring all these different data spaces together in a sensible way where they can cooperate and collaborate again? Not only technically, but also organizationally. Because I feel that there is a kind of blossoming of data spaces now, and that's fine, of course. It's just that how do you then guarantee that later these things go together again or come together again?
So, I don't, if you guys want to jump in. Well, I'll let you think of an answer. I'll think of what you want to say, but I can address this a little bit. Certainly, there's a lot of data. Certainly, there have been a lot of attempts to aggregate this data in different ways, and Milana already mentioned this. We know this is happening in health. We know this is happening even in some of the open science environmental research communities, where the first tool that you pull out of the toolbox is to create an aggregation, is to bring things together into your own little pile of data. And the purpose of data spaces is to avoid that kind of aggregation, but instead to make the data available in situ with what I think is needed is transparent disclosure of how you can access that data. What are the rules? What are the contracts? What's the metadata around this, not only in terms of semantics, but also in terms of policy, access, organizational rules, etc. So that's the hard part. One of the things that we did a study of 3 of those data spaces that Giuseppe looked at, GBIF, ENIS, and CDataNet. These are huge, largely open data sets. They do not have interoperable metadata. They cannot work together. But that's fine. They're in completely different communities. They don't need to work together yet. So that's not a problem. Meanwhile, they have, over 30 years, respectively, developed their own governance structures to arrive at an open science environment. And it took a lot of hard work to get there. So that's the kind of process that a lot of collections of data need to go through. They need to go through the internal process amongst their own members and their own data providers to say, what do we have to do to make sure we're prepared to share this data openly, to publish this data? And in many cases, different data providers are not ready to do that, so it's work to be done. And then the second question of making it interoperable from a semantic standpoint is yet another question. But I think the general idea is that we don't want to have a bunch of different overlapping aggregations. Instead, we want to solve the problem of the data where it sits, make it available from that place, give people the assistance they need to share that to the next person in a controlled way, without using various intermediary aggregation solutions to solve the problem partway. So that's a partial answer to your question.
Yeah, I just want to complement what Mark said, that to me what is missing is to try to incentivize, so to invite the data space provider to offer their data. So because sometimes in order to have this kind of interoperability, this is what is lacking. So not always all the data are available. So if we want to open to support multidisciplinary research, I think we need to invest in this as well.
And just a quick comment before, Juan has a special problem because he's dealing with personal health information. So there needs to be a whole nother special set of tools to make sure that we respect and control access to that data to ensure data sovereignty and privacy. So that's a whole nother layer that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think data spaces are still very much at the exploratory level. Still, so there is quite a lot of work to do, and before you can start to consolidate, you need to finish this exploratory phase, because if one has to find their way on how this has to be implemented, how you can provide federated data across borders, and all these things. And picking on the health data issues we have in that area, we have also the European data space legislative proposal that is going to change the landscape completely if it is approved that it was submitted, because anyone hosting clinic health data, either for acquired for clinical purpose or for research purpose, will have to make that data discoverable. And there will be a legal obligation to do that if the proposal is approved as it is now. And not only that, the data is required to run any study, that then they will have to make data available in 2 months. So that will change a lot, because it will force everyone to make the data discoverable, and then you will be able to find the data and to use that data. And it's still not clear what is going to come out of the Parliament, but yeah, we need to keep our option at the moment open and understand what is the landscape where we have to operate that is still not fully clear, and then we can start to try to minimize any duplications and try to consolidate the processes to ensure that we can provide access to different data spaces in the most seamless way, trying to improve the experience of the user. Yeah.
Okay, yes, one question, Joao from CERN. A question to Mark on your presentation, the first one, and a completely different topic, Gaia X. Yes, I'm aware of the work that you have done with Gaia X, but 2 years ago it seemed there was a lot of buzz about it, but for some reason that I don't understand, I don't know if it's my impression, it went a bit dormant. Can you comment on that? What happened? What is the current status of Gaia X as we speak?
So my personal opinion about Gaia X is there's some very promising work that they've been doing to create I call it an underlying, that first layer, you know, again, Milana's picture with the motherboard, they're defining a layer even beneath that to support a trust framework. I think it's quite promising. It represents quite a difference from the way, certainly in the science community, we operate. So for example, self-sovereign identities, distributed identification systems, DIDs, SSIs, the use of verified credentials as a mechanism for sharing certain attributes of individuals and data and so on to provide that kind of transparent disclosure and certifiable, verifiable disclosure about certain things. That's not something we use in the open science community today, so it's a rather big change, but I think it's promising. But having said that, you know, they're a long way from making this kind of something that you can just buy off the shelf and use tomorrow. So that's a challenge. I'm actually going on Thursday and Friday to their summit to see some new developments, catch up with folks. That's I think the big question is, where does it go from here, and how do you move it forward? Otherwise, there are parts of Gaia X that look like EOSC core, basically. All the catalogs, marketplaces, credentials, etc. It's not entirely different from what we've already seen several times before. But I do think what's now being worked on in this lower level trust framework could be very powerful, but it requires a bit of a change. And it's kind of similar if you're familiar with the high energy physics world, where they're moving away from sort of person-based authorizations to these tokens, this tokenized authorization mechanism. That's a big change for that community, and it's the same kind of big change that would be required across all of our communities if we were to be moving in this direction.
Mark van der Zanden from SURF and EUDAT. Just coming back to the question I think also Jos mentioned is, because you also mentioned that most of the developments of the data spaces are very early, still exploratory phases. What we should be able to prevent is that the data spaces in itself are developing themselves within a silo. So what kind of activities do you see to see what is overarching? Not for me looking, okay, we should use always the same technology, but at least on the interoperability layer, what are the connections, what are the standards to be used to interconnect the data spaces across, but also, for example, with EOSC. And I think at that level, probably much more interaction is needed across the data space, but also, for example, what we currently do in EOSC.
I can try to take that one. So it was mentioned before the Data Space Support Center that has just started too. So there's many activity that has just started, and we still need to, find our ways to collaborate together. And this is happening now. So we are contributing to that project too. So all the learning that we have around governance, standards, technology, we are feeding that into the Data Space Support Center that should help other data spaces, and we expect also to, also learn from the others and try to minimize the need to reinvent any wheel. We don't want to waste out that effort doing something that has been done before in some other places. We want to build on things that are already there, trying to accelerate the development of data spaces and to realize the benefit for the citizen, because the faster that we can progress, the better for everyone. But it has to be based on sharing the knowledge. I fully agree. Making things interoperable so we can easily, maybe not link, but at least discover what is there, and then see because if it's data space, we have different governance and different processes. That's almost inevitable. And even we will try to make them as similar as possible. There still will be difference. So we are working on that, but this is a work that has just started. So this is a very good opportunity for everyone to contribute because we just started with that.
Yeah, I think that is also.
You're cut off.
Okay. I think that is at the moment the right timing, because you are starting up, and there are already some developments who are a little bit further, I think, if you look at EOSC. Therefore, agreeing to see, okay, how do we interoperate with each other? How do you connect? And therefore, you need the discussion from the architecture point of view, but also from the interoperability point of view.
So just quickly, so turning back to the Gaia X conversation and the points just now, one thing that Gaia X is now talking about is it's kind of a no catalog view of things. In other words, there are no catalogs. Different people who have data that they're prepared to share, they expose the fact that they're prepared to share this data at some level, and they may even control who they show that shareability tools. So that's an independent, decentralized decision, and there is no central catalog. And that's quite different from what pretty much all of us have experienced. EOSC has got a very strong catalog orientation. I know that's the aggregators that you're talking about. I've seen it in many other community discussions. So kind of paralleling the question about Gaia X, another aspect of that would be to have an entirely decentralized exposure and visibility of the data and resources that you have. So if you're a repository, your repository needs to say, I've got this stuff, but I'm not going to copy a bunch of records to a bunch of different catalogs. And somebody who a company might have data and they say, we have this stuff we're prepared to sell to you or share with you for free under certain conditions. This is where this information is. So instead of putting this all into a catalog and then having to update the catalog and making sure you're looking at the right catalog, the one approach that we might take away from Gaia X is that we move entirely away from the catalog idea and say different holders of data can expose what they are prepared to share. I mean, I'm just sort of extrapolating the Gaia X mentality to what we're all struggling with. And frankly, we do spend across our different communities a lot of effort building catalogs, exposing catalogs, making them useful. So if we step back from that, there might be a different way of thinking, but point counterpoint.
But I think at least you should support the discoverability, because if you do not need a central catalog, but you need discoverability that something is available, that you can go where this is available. For example, if you look at Google, Google is not a catalog, but it is a search engine where you can discover the things where things is available. And I think that should at least be supported.
Yeah, just to add to that, with an example, in the genomic data infrastructure, we are using big conversion to enable the federated queries for phenotypic data. So that's basically, it's a federation where you publish the data that you want to make available for people, and then you don't have a central catalog. You just launch the query and you see what the data is, and then you can get get access and then analyze the data and so forth. But we also maintain the data catalog because there is also users that prefer that way to navigate the data. So we are, at the moment, we are keeping both because we need to serve all the users, not only the ones that are more advanced, but also the one that will benefit from a data catalog. So, yeah.
And one very important aspect about discoverability coming from my domain is that the amount of digitized content in the cultural heritage domain is estimated to be between 12 and 15% in Europe, maybe 1 to 2% in the big, very big institutions like the British Library, the Library of Congress, and so on. So the discoverability has also this aspect: what is available in the digital world, what is not available, because people get very, I would say, incorrect ideas with the belief that everything is already digitized. So that's an interesting aspect. I don't know how we are going to address this and in which domains it really matters, but that's there for us.
Gareth O'Neill, Technopolis and EOS Future. I have a question for Giuseppe, building a bit on what Mark just asked, and that has to do with the 5 EGIA's data spaces. So what is the current or planned link to the common European data spaces? And then more specifically in terms of interoperability, the EGI data spaces are aiming to be FAIR compliant and will be onboarded into EOSC. But what does that mean for the common European data spaces, which will not necessarily, if ever, be FAIR compliant or align with EOSC standards and guidelines, at least that I've understood?
Okay, so you are right. So the data space we are supporting are already FAIR. This is good, even if this was not officially a requirement. There are use cases that can work each other, let's say. For example, as was mentioned before by Mark, there is CDataNet, EMSO, ERIC, and GBIF basically can, if possible, they can share their data to create a multidisciplinary analysis and promote a new asset. So this is something that definitely we can promote. In the World Vision, yeah, I don't know if we can propose something, honestly, I don't know. Because, yeah, in principle, we can propose support this kind of integration, but it's not on us, of course, it depends by the data space. We can propose, provide the solution in order to make this data space scalable, and, but in the end, they need to discuss with us and try to come up with a solution. I don't know if I answered correctly your question, which was quite tough.
Can I offer a thought? We talk in EOSC about registering resources, data, research products, into EOSC, so it's discoverable in EOSC. It should also be possible, potentially, to register into to be available to a data space. And there might be some, whatever the right technology might be, that is, spoken by an IDSA database or a Gaia X database or something else. There might be some service that EOS could operate to say, yes, these 1,300, 13,000, 13 million data sets have been registered to be available to one or more common European data spaces, and we, EOS, will provide the interface to make them accessible and plug into whichever ones exist, whether it's simple or IDSA or what have you. So that could be a pathway. It's not a native pathway. It's sort of a workaround, if you will, to what it really ought to be, which is, by definition, EOSC registered data should be generally available and visible to any of the data spaces. So I don't think we're there yet. We might be able to achieve that, but as a starting point, that might be a way to move forward.
Can I have a question adding on that? how about the other way around? Because a lot of the data that these data spaces are producing is a wealth for research. And, you know, it's in EOSC, what we are trying to produce is we're trying to produce fair data and as much as possible as much as possible. So one way of communicating this from EOSC to data spaces, it seems it's rather easier than the other way around, from data spaces to EOSC, so that researchers can get their hands on this data and use them for research.
There's a quick answer and a long answer to that, very good point. I wanted to make the point earlier. Milena was talking about the IDSA radar and how it didn't see anything in cultural heritage, despite the fact that there were 53 trillion. No, that's the wrong number. 53 million assets digitally. The focus of the data space world is very much on business. It's very much industrially focused. So they do not, that community is not doing a good job of learning from what research already knows. So for example, the fact that CDataNet took 30 years to agree on open publishing standards for data that, gee, isn't it open already? Why was it so hard? Well, it just is, and it takes time. So they assume these are problems that are very easy in the research world. At the same time, they regard their own problems of, oh, I have my data and I want a whole bunch of laws and controls and special technology to control and maintain my data, my sovereignty over the use of that data. So the data that's being put into these sectoral data spaces is in large measure assumed to be not so much public data, but data from companies. And so they're putting all that data inside of a lot of usage controls. EOSC does not have a good way of managing that. It doesn't have, even for private personal health data, it doesn't have a good way of handling personal health data in the EOSC model of business. It's all assumed to be open. Same problem arises with sensitive data, with confidential IP, etc. So EOSC doesn't have good tools for that, and it needs those tools. When it has those tools, it could potentially more readily take data in from the data spaces. If there is open data in the manufacturing data space, certainly we could bring that in to EOSC. They could register it as a data holder, data provider, and go forward from there. The question would be, what do they, can we make that, should EOSC reach out to the 11 data spaces and do agreements with them to say, hey, we want whatever is open, we want to replicate it or make it visible in the EOSC catalog? Maybe. So anyway.
Yeah, if I can may add to that. So it's true that we are managing sensitive human data. It's difficult to fed into EOS. That's just not cannot happen at the moment. But we are also building quite a lot, not us directly, but the community is building quite a lot of real synthetic data that is not protected and that can be deployed anywhere, and people can use to develop new methods. So that's something that could be explored. But still having sensitive data in EOS is something that will take time for sure.
Yeah, but I think at the moment there's talk about open data. But for example, fair has nothing to do with just open data. Therefore, if you want to be fair, you have to make your data discoverable. More it is looking at what kind of metadata can you provide to make your data discoverable, so that you know that the data is available somewhere. And then if you go to the data, you can implement all your own processes of getting access to the data, if that is possible, if that is allowed. So therefore, I think the term open, I would more look at, okay, do you want to make your data fair? And then you can make the data discoverable on the terms as how the data can be made accessible.
I think that's all true, but if you go to Explore right now and pick any item of data, the presumption is that there's an open access license there. There isn't, I don't think, a mechanism to say, oh, here's metadata about a piece of sensitive data for which I need to communicate with the holder and agree on a data transfer agreement, licensing, usage controls, etc.
It is not mandatory that it is open, but we are striving to make as much open as possible.
That's
but
our starting point.
As you look at the use cases, not all data can be open, but at least make metadata open so that you can make it discoverable. Then you can implement any process you want to get access.
To do a parallel, so for example, one of the challenges in health, and one of the things that the European Health Data Space is working to do, is to create a common regulatory framework that would allow a researcher from Slovenia to access data from 4 different countries and to go through a common request process to get their research reviewed so that they can get access to those 4 data sets. As it stands right now, you have to go through 4 different processes. You might have to go through 12 if it's 6 different places in Germany.
I fully agree. That will be the focus, to have those
and
common...
we need the same kind of harmonization for non-open data.
And also, for example, on the licensing, access rules which you have. And that I would more think about what the focus should be.
Yeah.
Last question.
Yes, thank you, Ron Dekker, Technopolis, and also EOSC Future. I want to continue on this fair and open versus fair. One of the fair principles is that even for data that are closed, the metadata are openly available. So how can you meet the fair principles if you don't have the metadata available?
Well, the presumption of fair is that the metadata is available. There is some data for which even publishing the metadata may be seen to be a violation of privacy, and that creates special processes, especially in health. So it's I don't know if you have this game in Europe, it's called Go Fish. Do you have any 3s? No, I don't have any 3s. You have to pull a card from the table. So you can't say, I have 3s, 5s, 7s, what have you. You have to, there's no metadata about what I'm holding in my hand of cards. I have to ask. So that is a process that actually goes on right now in health. So you can...
Yeah, so yeah, it seems trivial, but it's not. So we have a bunch of experts trying to streamline that process and ensure that we can have metadata that generate value and that you can access without going straight to the data. But there is so many, still there is so many questions to solve, because even, you know, in Beacon you can make a query and just ask who has data with, you know, that is referring to women that has cancer and where they were smoking, and they can get you back just the number. They can tell you I have 10 cases. And in principle that should be okay. But it turns out that it depends how you just generated the number, that it could, maybe it's not okay from the LC point of view. So even if it seems quite trivial, you have to go to how that number has been generated to ensure that privacy has been respected. And it's not, you know, you learn this when you talk to the expert. It's not that trivial, and we need to ensure that we have the right process in places to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I understand, but let's start with the 99% where metadata do fit and do not reveal privacy. So I think we can make a good start. And there are many projects. I know the e-remote project by DAISY and others dealing with secure access, etc. And that can be developed in parallel. But my plea is make the metadata available for the 99% of the data that allow that.
No, sure. I fully agree. We have to do that. And there is, I mean, this is not my point of view is that it's not a technology problem. So the technology is there, and we can, in Beacon, you can have 3 layers on how much data you want to make available to people. So you can easily implement that, but you also need to have, you know, people need to have the backup that they are not doing anything wrong at the regulatory level. And that's where most of the time we have the stopper.
I keep on trying. One final comment. I think this goes to another topic, which is about trust about reuse. And for me, that is different from the metadata. The metadata don't reveal individual information. But sometimes you want even hide the metadata. I know if you do synchrotron, you do protein, you don't want to reveal the name of the protein even, because that's already confidential. But I think you're touching upon another important topic, how to provide the trust and credit for reusing the data.
So just to speak to that, I think that's why I mentioned the Gaia X model. I think there's some value there because it bakes some of these issues down to some very atomic concepts that can be deployed and combined in different ways so that you can manage the sensitivity of the data that you're potentially disclosing, the sensitivity of the data about the data you want to disclose, and also you can manage information about the community you're working with. So you may say, look, I'm only going to share this kind of data with an accredited health researcher who's working in myeloma, because other people will not understand, and I do not want to expose this data, and meanwhile, I trust the fact that this person has been accredited, not only in myeloma, but also in proper data handling technologies. This is actually part of some of the discussions in the health research world, is that there should be accredited people who deal with sensitive data. So in addition to just having a username and a password, you need to have some credentials to say you're qualified to work with sensitive data. And it's not just health. The same can be the case there are many examples in industry, in biology, non-health related biology, et cetera, with its IP, confidential information. So it's just, my point is that it's an extensible framework, but it requires a lot of work to implement.
Can I build on what you said? Is that I think what we're trying to do a lot is to have the IT and ICT just take care of everything, where there are other models where they give trust on the processes, okay? And I came up the other day in a very nice model by the UK NHS, sharing trusted environments.
Yeah,
and they are
UK
just
HDRA, trust secure processing.
Exactly. So this is, and maybe in EOSC, and especially with interaction of EOSC and data spaces, maybe this is something that we should ought to look into.
So there are some tremendous concepts in there: safe projects, safe data, safe people, safe outputs, safe environments, physical environments. So that five safes model is actually, I think, very powerful.
Okay, thanks a lot for all the questions and remarks. I think that we need to move on. We were supposed to have a panel discussion. I don't think we have now time to address all the questions. So if you agree, Mark, probably we could ask the speakers to give their final messages and hints to people how they can further continue the conversation and get engaged with your data spaces.
Yeah, so thank you, Madalena, for the invitation. Thank you for everyone for their contribution and the questions. I think, as I said before, I think we are just at the beginning of the road. There is many things to do, and we need everyone to contribute. We don't have all the solutions. Not the technical expert, not the legal expert have all the solutions on how data can be enabled for everyone to benefit citizens in Europe. And we need everyone to come with ideas and help us to get it right, because there is a potential risk that the data space can go different routes, and then we'll have to bring them together later, and that will require additional resources and time, and we don't want that to happen. So we are at the beginning, and we have the opportunity to do things right, and I think we all need to contribute to that.
Okay, so my final takeaway message is, we as AGI, we are operating the infrastructure, and we are offering solution and services for promoting this scalable data space. So if you are interested, if you need to deploy your data space, come to us, we can discuss, and we can have a follow-up meeting. Thank you.
I think it sounds awfully trivial, but for me, collaboration is key. Discussions between different types of communities, networks, providers, and so on is very important. We need to arrive to some sort of a clearer understanding what data spaces are. And we also should not forget about the smaller players. In our sector, we have thousands of small institutions. I really would hate seeing that they are not able to jump into the data space and they remain isolated.
I've said too much. I thank Natalia for getting me to say the 5 safes. I actually think in the data space world, fairness is not enough. We need quality, and we need the 5 aspects of the 5 safes. And I think there are ways within EOSC for us to instrument this, to build this into the platform so that it measures, it discloses, it keeps track of this kind of thing, so that when you start putting the pieces together, you can continue to be assured that you're maintaining safe people, safe data, safe projects, etc. So these are concepts that we can reduce to practice, but we do have to coordinate, as you say, to work together to make that happen. It's not easy. Everybody thinks in their own little world, but in fact, you know, it's like the life of Brian. Everybody's different, except they're all different, exactly the same. So that's about all from me. I am very enthusiastic about this topic and would happily chat with anyone for however many days you have. So thank you.
Thank you.